Say a few words about Shabbat Hagadol and then segue into my talk for today. There's a dispute in the Talmud about when the Messiah comes, some arguing for Pesach and some arguing for Sukkot. And so what you have are traditions that try to point out the day that the Mashiach will come and bring peace to the world. So for those who think it is Passover, they chant, which is our, by the way, our tradition is divided. So we have messianic readings at Passover and messianic readings at Sukkot. Messianic meaning predicting the coming of the Messiah. So the great and awesome day of God, Yom HaGadol VeHaNorah, is at the end of the book of Malachi, and this, which is Shabbat Hagadol, which is the Shabbat that is announcing that we're coming on Passover, and this might be the time that the Messiah will come. Many people ask me, do I believe in the coming of the Messiah? No, but I don't object if that happens. So I'll be very cool if somebody comes and just establishes world peace. I say, I didn't see this coming, but I'm totally, totally grateful that it happened. Other than that, I think that the work of the bringing peace to the world starts with each one of us. It's going to be a long, hard struggle looking how things are today. I was talking to a despairing person the other day and just was overwhelmed with all the bad things happening. That it really is the kind of the end of the world. It's the end of Israel, the end of America. The world's going to fall into disorder and tyranny. And I said to him, one thing I learned from jiu-jitsu, you don't start a sparring match by acknowledging defeat. You go in thinking, yeah, this might be hard, but I'm in for the long game. We have good skills. We're going to turn this thing around. So I want everybody to realize, we can despair. There's rough things going on. But you don't go into a struggle admitting defeat. You go into a struggle and say, this is going to be tough. It's going to be a long game. We have to master our skills, spread the word, spread truth, spread real justice, not what goes under the guise of justice in many circles today. And I think we're all enlisted and up for it. Okay, so the origin of Shabbat Hagadol is found in the book of Malachi. Remember, Malach is an angel or a messenger. Malachi means my angel or messenger. In English, people say Malachi. That's okay. There are many words in Hebrew that are mistranslated into English. But if you want to know the Hebrew way of saying it, it is the book of Malachi, my messenger. All right, to go into my message for today, I'm interested in a couple of things. And remember, if you go into the deep study of Passover, the Passover Haggadah, it really is a very finely crafted libretto for an opera. I don't recommend trying to teach that at a Passover Seder. Everybody who studies the Passover Seder deeply and carefully is amazed at what they find there, and then they want to teach everybody, but that's not why people come to a Passover Seder. So I wrote an article years ago for the Jewish Journal called Seder for One, which means having your own Seder before you go to a Passover Seder, and remember why people are coming there. First of all, just to be with other people, to listen to our origin story. I'll talk about that in a moment. To engage in the rituals. People want meaning, fun, connection. And I think anybody who's at a Seder or presiding at a Seder ought to remember why people are coming. In fact, at some of our Seders, we ask everybody, what's your goal for tonight? What do you want? And it's people who are Jewish, connection with my past, be with other Jewish people, and engage in the rituals. People who are not Jewish say, I really want to understand this. It sounds so interesting. It sounds so fun. Please involve me. So it's not a bad thing if you're at a Passover Seder, go around the room and say, what is everybody looking forward tonight? It's probably going to come down to enjoyable, meaningful, familiar traditions, new traditions, and so forth. And we should all be ready to help that happen. So one thing that I try to do each year is pick one or two themes for my Passover for one. And if I can bring that into a Seder, which is, by the way, mostly our daughter's friends this year. You all know that we're moving to Israel probably in June. The girls are here to say goodbye to the house. It's really sad. And have some of their friends over. With that, I want to assure everybody, as Oratora transfers from a membership synagogue to a wisdom institute, which means there's not going to be a membership, there's just going to be supporters, We will continue Friday nights Pacific time, Shabbat morning Pacific time. But of course, we rely on everybody who wants to support this. It's not going to be on the so-called Orator members. Anybody who supports it, wants to attend, thinks it's a good idea, wants the world to have it, we're going to rely on you to help keep this going. All right, so the two things I want to focus on today is, first of all, the so-called wise son. Now, remember, when you look at the so-called Arba Banim, the four sons of the four children, it's completely a rabbinic artifice. What they've done is they've taken 4 places in the Torah where it mentions teaching this to your children or teaching this to your son. The rabbis, when they were creating the Haggadah, they put them in so we could remember each time it says, and you shall teach your child. By the way, the word Haggadah comes, Vihigadata lavanecha, you shall tell your son. Higadata, the command form of Haggadah, which is to narrate a story. So the rabbis invented a typology. It's a pure rabbinic invention. The Chacham, the wise one, the Rasha, the so-called wicked or rebellious one, the simple one, the Tam, innocent, simple, and the Eno Yodei Lishol, one who doesn't even know how to formulate a question. That's a complete rabbinic invention. I think it's a brilliant invention. At different times and many times, we've used these 4 typologies and examined them very deeply. And then at other times, we ask, well, are there 4 different typologies of human beings, of personalities? And that can be a really great discussion. It can maybe even take up all your discussion time at Passover. When you finish the first rituals, let's go back and ask, are there 4 spiritual personalities? Are there 4 kinds of spiritual seekers? Are there 4 kinds of religiosity, and so forth? I think that can be a very, very fruitful discussion. So one of the things I want to focus on is when we say the wise son, and somewhat ignoring what the Haggadah has to say, which is someone who wants to learn all the commandments. I think that's great, but I think that's a tiny part of wisdom. I want to share with you some of my thoughts about wisdom as we are formulating Wisdom Institute. I'm getting my thoughts together on what exactly that means. So I shared a bit of this list another day. I'll share it now. And remember, if you want to hear this again, it'll be up on YouTube soon. So if with the so-called wise son, we are bidden to become what I'm going to call a person of wisdom. So here are some elements. A person of wisdom should have knowledge of the things they care about and the things they talk about. One thing that we're very frustrated with, I know, are people who have strong opinions and very limited knowledge. In fact, oftentimes, the shallowness of knowledge is matched by the toxicity of the opinion. And there's a reason for that. Because if you have deep knowledge, the things we care about are actually complex. There's no single way of looking at it. So, in my opinion, people who have strong opinions without knowledge makes things worse. And you'll always meet people with very strong opinions. You try to engage them, and you realize they're stuck to their opinions, or they have an ideology, or what I'm going to call the quasi-religion that we see happening today, the postmodernism, critical theory gone bad, what I call the antis, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism, all of that projected into hatred for Israel, hatred for the United States, and a growing anti-Semitism. I think it's a very bad thing. The problem with talking about it, that you realize it's a quasi-religion, it's an ideology, and you really can't chip away because, in my opinion, this is going to sound rather harsh, but I've done a lot of study and something that I think I know. Many people who don't have a strong sense of meaning in life are looking for meaning. You'll see this in Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer. So Eric Hoffer makes this point. I talked about this after October 7th. Why do mass movements attract people? Partly because they lack meaning. Somebody arrives and says, I will give you meaning in your life. I'll give you a worldview. I'll tell you what the evil is, what the good is, and we'll demonstrate and we'll make noise and we'll have meetings. And it's almost like a religious atmosphere. Sometimes protests are a way of expressing devotion to the ideology. So from the study of the attraction of mass movements that Eric Hoffer wrote about in 1951, and many more things that I could cite, I think that people who have a kind of an emptiness without a strong spiritual and moral foundation are open to very bad ideas because of the desire to feel meaning in life. And if you can't find it yourself, you'll take over what someone else gives you. And if you don't have a strong sense of a moral code, you'll take on the moral code of other people, which might be good, but their moral code might be bad. For example, this includes debasing, humiliating, and scaring other people. I see that as immoral. If you talk to somebody who says, well, we have to do that because that's the only way we can change the world, I actually doubt if it's true, and it's also immoral. So for me, knowledge helps us not be ideologues. Knowledge helps us, even if you have a religion, you're not dogmatic about it, because, for example, in Judaism, if you look at the Talmud, etc., there's no dogma because the Talmud is filled with disagreement. So if you really want to know about Judaism, be ready for a cacophony of interpretations about what it all means. Meaning, we all might light Shabbos candles, but what it means is open to vast interpretations, whether you're a Maimonidean, you focus on the Midrash, the Zohar, etc. The more you know, the more the complex world is, and then you're ready to admit, wow, there's a lot I don't know. And so when you meet somebody else that has a different opinion, you say, I'm curious. So I think a person who's committed to knowledge has curiosity instead of dogmatism. For me, that is part of becoming a wise person. Whatever you know there's more to know, and we can learn from books and we can learn from other people. So we want to say respectful, curious, not to the point that we abandon what we know for sure, but we're certainly open to more knowledge. I want to quote a jiu-jitsu teacher in Israel. So I visited a jiu-jitsu club, and somebody had a certain escape from a certain position, and I escaped from a position. They said, I've never seen that escape before. Would you show me? And I felt bad because I'm in somebody else's jiu-jitsu club, and apparently he hadn't taught this escape. I said, okay, I'll teach it to you, but then I got to go get permission. So I taught the person the escape. I walked over to the black belt around the club. I said, he saw I had a black belt. I said, one of your students asked me about an escape. Is it okay that I teach it? He said, more knowledge is always good. I thought that was especially gracious, and saying, I don't know all of jiu-jitsu. If you know something I don't know, bring it to my club. We'll just all get better at jiu-jitsu. And I thought that was great. And he said it, in 1/100th of a second. Like, of course you can teach anything that you know. It'll only make us all better. So again, a person can say, well, I know, I'm a black belt. I know all of jiu-jitsu, so don't you teach anything that I don't teach in my club? I think that's a very stiff, rigid way of looking at it. Or the more knowledge, the better. Let me see what you have, and maybe I can find a defense or something like that. All right, so knowledge is not dogma. Knowledge is mastery of the things you care about. A person of wisdom wants relative mastery. If you're going to talk about it, have an opinion about it, at least know something about it, and realize you don't know everything about it. Now, I'm discussing wisdom. Knowledge is one element of wisdom because, of course, there are knowledgeable people who are not wise. You might say, that's a super knowledgeable person, but not a very wise person. Why might they not be wise? Well, another core element, as we discuss wisdom because of the wise son, is what I'm going to call rationality. So with knowledge, there's a special skill called rationality, and because this is such an essential part of Wisdom Works, which is the foundation of the Wisdom Institute, I'll define that word a little bit. What is a rational person? Well, first of all, a rational person has knowledge and doesn't have a narrative behind the knowledge, which means they're not looking for knowledge to populate their narrative. They actually are willing to learn things that might disrupt their narrative, like a good scientist. As I've read books on the history of science, one might think that scientists are committed to the scientific method, that they just want to learn empirical things and then come up with theories. If you look at the history of science, bitter debates arise because someone learned something new and people said, well, that can't be. That's irrelevant. That's a one-off. You can't develop a theory from that. And I'm thinking to myself, well, these are scientists. And so you look at the history of science, even science is filled with severe dogmatism and really ruining people's reputations. It's a really horrible thing when you look at the actual the politics and sociology of science. So a wise person is willing to examine all of the evidence. And if you believe something, a person says, well, what you think is true actually is not, and now in the days of instant information, you can probably find your way to a factual knowledge, something that is factually true, that doesn't support their narrative. And people have done this with me. Somebody has their mic on. Let's make sure all the mics are off. And of course, I've done this for other people. So a wise person is rational, means you have all the facts that you can assemble. Now, as you assemble facts, you derive good theories from facts. Good theories from facts. I'll give a classic example. A person comes to me and they says, my 14-year-old is not telling the truth, is hanging out with bad people, is experimenting with marijuana, is disrespectful and secretive. And I say, you could have stopped at teenager. That's just, right? This is not a new phenomenon. And so what I realized, the person had never read anything about child development and adolescent development. If you really knew about adolescence, your child is one of those. So instead of putting down your child, getting mad at your child for being this subspecies of human being called adolescent, figure out how to raise your adolescent in a wise way. Okay? So you assemble all the knowledge, you realize, well, I have an adolescent in the house. So oftentimes when people say to me, I don't understand why my husband does this. I don't understand why my wife does this. And my response is, well, give it a shot. They say, what do you mean by give it a shot? Because when they say I don't understand, that's actually a complaint. You know, the four C's: criticizing, complaining, condemning, escalating conflict. When a person says, I don't understand my wife or husband, what they really mean is, I don't like it. I just try to turn around and say, give it a shot. In your mind, what accounts for that behavior? A wise person won't complain how a person is. A wise person will look at a behavior and try to understand what kind of things might be going on inside of a person, consciously or unconsciously, that would produce that kind of behavior. It might be personality. It might be stress. It might be a misunderstanding. There's so many things that could go on to it. A person who is not rational will look at the behavior and say, I don't understand. A person of wisdom rarely will do that, and they'll only say, I don't understand, when they really hit a wall. You know, it's a culture in our family, you know, when raising our kids, and we say, can you explain why you did that? They say, I really don't know why I did it. And our response is, I have time. Which means go on a journey inside as much as you can. Go through your thoughts, feelings, emotions, your different ego selves, because something motivated you. It's very common we don't know what it is. So a rational person, actually, I'll talk about this in a minute, wants to understand themselves and other people. So knowledge has rationality, searching for facts, creating theories on facts, and emotional states are facts. You know, for example, anger might not be based on facts, oftentimes isn't, but anger is a fact. I say, well, that person's angry, or I'm angry, and you want to investigate that deeply. I would say that a person of wisdom rarely makes judgments, I'm going to call this sound judgment, under the sway of strong feelings and emotions. I want you to think about it. A person is really angry, really depressed, really upset, inconsolable. Try to imagine that that person can actually issue wise, sound judgment. They probably have to be on the other side of it before they can say anything that's true, meaningful, you know, in some kind of practical sense, meaning wisdom that I can use. I mean, we're devoted to practical wisdom. So therefore, a person of wisdom can learn to separate distraught emotional states in the unconscious ego self, is what I call it, consciously and willfully access the higher self, which is a place of rationality and truth and wisdom, and issue sound judgment, not under the sway of negative emotions, feelings, thoughts, etc. So that's another element of wisdom from my perspective. I believe that a person of wisdom uses words carefully, precisely, and can define them fairly. Now, I've been teaching this for years and years and years. When people say to me, that was horrible what they did, and I thought it was, rude, I thought it was ill-considered, but horror, we're going to wait for horror. What people do is they use words that ratchet up their feelings, and then they define other people according to their ratcheted up feelings. And this is called philosophical, people call this philosophical therapy. I just call it wisdom counseling. Use words that fit and be able to define your words as is used by precise speakers of your native language. Now, parenthetically, this is one of my deep, profound objections to people using the word genocide, when I think that what they mean is avoidable, unnecessary civilian casualties. I think that's what they mean. Avoidable, unnecessary civilian casualties. They might say intentional civilian casualties. And if they say there are intentional civilian casualties, what some people might call collateral damage, or maybe there's an intention to kill civilians. Now, in warfare, when somebody intentionally kills civilians, that's called a war crime. But not every war crime is genocide. Meaning, if you look at the unnecessary, avoidable deaths of civilians in war, no war comes to mind that doesn't have civilian casualties that are avoidable, preventable, and sometimes, large or small scale, intentional. Now, when does it rise to genocide? That's an interesting question, but having taught Shoah, the genocide of the Jews in Europe in the Second World War, we developed an understanding, which really is the intent to destroy an entire ethnic group, including their culture, etc. So the genocide of the Jews fits. The genocide in Rwanda fits. I think the Balkan Wars had a genocidal element. I don't think there was an intention to wipe out every Croatian, but there was definitely mass murder with the goal of ethnic cleansing, which can come close to genocide. So I'm going to say ethnic cleansing, as horrible as it is, and as criminal as it is, it might be, we want these foreigners off our land. They go back to their own land. We don't care. If they're on our land, we're going to kill every single one of them. Now, some people call that genocide. I reserve genocide for what happened to the Jews in World War II. I reserve genocide, what happened to the Armenians in the First World War, what happened in Rwanda, certain other cases. So why are people, now I'm trying to apply my knowledge and insight, why do people so much want to accuse Israel of genocide? It's really an obsession. They're not using it in Ukraine. They're not using it anywhere else. Okay, I have a theory. I could be wrong. Jews have used the Holocaust as a justification for the state of Israel, right or wrong. But I think we've heard that before. The genocide proves that Jews are not safe in the world. They must have a land of their own so they can protect themselves. Okay? Now, again, I'm not saying that is true or rational. I'm saying it's a statement I've heard and it might be true. So genocide justifies the state of Israel, to put it very briefly. So how do you attack that idea? Well, Israel is committing genocide, so they've lost their right to their country. If they're the victims of genocide and create a state, if they perform genocide, they've lost their right to their state. So I think accusing Israel of genocide is a way, now it could be wrong, this is my theory, is a way to delegitimize the existence of the state of Israel and accuse the Jews of the worst thing ever done to them. It's a way of delegitimizing Jewish experience, delegitimizing the state of Israel. So if I hear somebody say genocide, I'll say, may I ask you what your definition of genocide is? And if they say intentional killing of civilians in a war, I will say, as a historian of the Second World War, that's usually not called genocide, because if so, well, who was one of the most genocide, if that were true? Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and all the Allies, if you look at the way they fought the Axis powers. Certainly Stalin, no doubt. And then you start looking at warfare, then the word loses its meaning, because then we actually don't have a word for conquering an enemy by killing civilians, which we the United States did on an enormous scale in the bombing of civilian locations in Germany and Japan, as you all know. Now, I haven't heard very many people calling Franklin Roosevelt a perpetrator of genocide, but if that's your definition, then Franklin Roosevelt should be reframed as a person who willfully committed genocide, and Harry Truman. So that's why I want to reserve the word genocide for something unique, because in the bombing of Germany to submit Germany to the Second World War and Japan, there was no attempt to actually exterminate the German people. There's no attempt to exterminate the Japanese people. It was intentional to shorten the war, which would save casualties in the end. That's one of the explanations. I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying it's something that I've heard, and it might be true. So a person of wisdom uses words with precision, because when we don't use words with precision, you might say words are start to have what's called a mission crawl. When you have a mission and it expands and expands and expands, if you say, well, the mission of a word is to communicate meaning, at least that's one of the missions, especially in something that it's not poetic language, it's not narratival, it's actually used to discuss things rationally. When you use words imprecisely, they wipe out other words, and then the word becomes somewhat meaningless because it's only a rhetorical device. I'm sharing this with you. You can check on the YouTube if you want to, but I'm not saying I can say all of this at a Seder, but when I think of a person of wisdom, that the so-called wise son inspires me for this conversation, a person of wisdom uses words precisely and doesn't allow words to obliterate other words, let other words have meaning. And this is all up for discussion, but I don't recommend letting words put other words in their umbrella. A few more things about a person of wisdom. A person of wisdom, in my mind, is fair-minded. Now, by fair-minded, it means something, and fairness is very difficult, by the way. Whenever I teach theories of justice, I'm going to say real justice, not the charade that's going on today. One of the things we say is justice as fairness. That when you look at an issue, you hear all sides of an issue, you ask yourself, is there a fair way to resolve this? Where both people walk away, let's say reasonably unhappy. That's actually a term I came up with many years ago. Both sides are reasonably unhappy. Now, not always, because sometimes the fair decision makes one person very happy and another person very unhappy. But at least a person of wisdom can make a case. I'm going to say what I think. I'm going to give my judgment, and I'll tell you why. And hopefully you will believe that this is fair-minded. By the way, in counseling, remember, I don't see myself as doing therapy. I think this is called wisdom counseling. And one thing many people want is, well, what's right? Not how do we feel and why do we feel it, but can you offer your opinion on who's right? And I say, I don't like to, so what I'm going to have to do is hear a lot more, get a lot more information, develop good theories about your information, separate my own feelings, because sometimes things that happen certainly arouse feelings inside of me. I can become judgmental. I got to read that out. And I'm going to tell you what I think. I'll be fair-minded, but I have to back it up with all my knowledge and theories so that although you might not like my opinion, you will say, yes, that's fair-minded. So fair-minded is not just having knowledge and facts and theories, but truly understanding things from as many relevant perspectives as possible. The last thing I'll say about wisdom is insight to yourself. A wise person has to have insight into themselves so they know that they're not reading their narrative onto a situation. Now, I don't mean this in venting. When we vent our emotions to people, to another person or to a therapist or somebody, I recognize that people are venting. They're not saying true, rational, considered things. Everybody has to be able to vent as long as they know they're venting. But at some point, if a person wants to become a person of wisdom, they have to have insight so they understand the nature of their inner life. I don't have time for today to develop a theme that I want to develop. Is just as Passover is an origin story of the people of Israel, we also have origin stories of our own, which means points in our life, turning points in our life, including our suffering, that help direct us toward who we are today. So we don't have a single origin story. I think we have a collection of origin stories, and I'll use Passover to say that one thing you might want to do at this time is think of your origin stories, and as you consider them, ask yourself, are they relatively factual? Are my origin stories fair-minded? Not just how did I feel, but what actually happened. Again, I don't have time to develop this today, but one thing, again, this is in the background of a Passover Seder, is families to discuss their family history. What happened in our family? When people can talk about it in a factual, non-defensive way, not try to push their narrative, but in a fair-minded way, without assigning blame, not talking about hurt, the history of a family or relationship. This is incredibly difficult, and one might have to prepare a decade to have that conversation, but I think understanding our origin stories and understanding the origin stories of others and understanding what I'll call the origin stories in families and relationships, I think is a worthwhile process, even if it takes 10 years of preparation. So insight into yourself, insight into others as much as possible, insight into the nature of relationships. This is all from wisdom work. I just want to mention it today. Understanding of the predictable life processes that people go through. A wise person can say, well, this happens in a lot of families. This happens in most couples. There's a start and a messy middle, and oftentimes a resolution if everybody is knowledgeable and rational and has goodwill. So I think that wise people have an understanding of actually even institutions. Institutions, organizations, associations, they have a life of their own. And I know because of my long experience in institutional life, nearly lifelong experience in institutional life, when somebody else is going through something, I might offer, may I offer you a thought? I'll say, well, institutions are actually associations, collections of people at some level, and institutions have their own story. And if one understands the processes, life processes, not just of people, but also of institutions. Sometimes people said, wow, that's so wise. It's like, it's not just me. It's something that institutions go through. I said, yeah. So the question is, what actually is happening, how I can guide it to a good resolution, and see myself as part of something that's beyond the understanding of people until they decide to become a person of wisdom. So all of this, I'll repeat it briefly. Knowledge, and again, fearless knowledge of the relevant facts, the commitment to rationality, which means you take your fearless knowledge and turn it into good theories, minimal assumptions, no prejudices, no jumping to conclusions, using language carefully, being fair-minded, insight into yourself, others, relationships, life processes of people, and the life processes and nature of associations, organizations, etc. For me, all of this together as lifelong work produces something very simply called sound, wise judgment. If you want to be a reliable person who can give sound, wise judgment, in my mind, all this has to go on deliberately or intuitively, but whenever you've heard someone say something particularly wise, I almost guarantee you, most of this has gone on, again, either deliberately or intuitively, And one reason I want us to talk about this in some way, again, I know I offered a lot of information today, so this will go up on my YouTube channel soon. If that can be even a minor theme of a Passover Seder, it really might help some people, because people don't have knowledge, they're not rational, they're swayed by their emotions and feelings, they have a narrative not rooted in facts, they're not fair-minded, they're suffering, they cause other people suffering, and there actually is something for that called wisdom.